This channel is supported by Truefire. Truefire is an online library
enough, you can get the Truefire All Access Pass for as cheap as they ever do it, the $99 thing. So just jump and do that if you're looking for the best price that you can get Truefire All Access for.
Hi, my name is John Cordy, and people often ask what I do for a living. The answer is that I work in the PRS Cortek factory in Indonesia on the weekends. And in the meantime, midweek, I fly back into Devon and make videos and live with my daughter and wife and 8 dogs. Right, anyway, so recently, Phil McKnight did a video about the Cortek factory in Indonesia, and there's some kind of staggering stuff that came out from that. I think it's something like 1 million guitars that they make there per year. And I think the state of guitar manufacturing in 2025, it's probably been like this way a fair amount of time, to be honest, is that there's like a few hubs around the world that seem to make just like almost all the guitars. So you think Cort in Indonesia, you think there's a couple, I think one of them's called Axel or something like that in China. There's, I think, some elsewhere. There's a Yamaha place that they build stuff is in Malaysia. Then obviously there's Corona in America, and there's, you know, Fujigen in Japan, and Yamaha, I think there's a lot of manufacture that happens in Japan as well still. And there's like Mexico, right, for some of the Fender stuff as well. But a lot of the guitars, I mean, if you draw it on like a heat-seeking map, I watched Predator the other day. If anyone is, it was really cool to see this put to use in Predator. Yeah, I hadn't watched Predator when I bought this knife, by the way. I mean, I had, but I didn't really. It's just a cool knife, isn't it? Anyway, so yes, if you were to draw like a heat-seeking map of where most of the guitars in the world are made, it's like Indonesia, Japan, America, like just around South America, that like border there. Like I guess there's quite a lot still from Korea as well. But I think the point is that I saw a video from Sorehands, all right, Cameron, and I mean, the problem with Sorehands is he's often right. And he kind of titled the video "Where Your Trash Guitars Are Made," what you didn't know about where your trash guitars are made, or something like that. And I thought that was kind of funny, but also like there's an element of truth to it. And a company recently have approached me and they've asked me like to record like 4 little snippets, one of which is saying like this guitar is like boutique vibes or whatever, but it's from one of these mass manufactured places, and it's kind of like, why would I say that about a thing that's obviously not boutique? So in this video I wanted to talk a bit about first of all, I think if you're going to call these trash guitars, you should try building one, because even the mass manufactured stuff, you know, like the NF53, I think actually when you see what these are like versus, you know, like an American core PRS NF53, or, you know, like a Fender custom shop or any of these things, I do think there's not as much difference as you'd hope based on how much you spend on these things. also like 4 different parts of the factory that that kind of started off as your standard, then master, then deluxe, and then there was one above deluxe, and it kind of makes you think, okay, well, they're just naming these things anyway, right? So yes, there's a huge range of guitars coming out of that Cortek factory. As said in Phil McKnight's video, 1 million guitars shipping a year. Now, here's what I'd say. If you actually look at some of these videos, so for instance, I've watched like Gibson factories, Epiphone factories, and all of that sort of stuff. They are quite consistent in that if you watch them, it tends to just be a person at a station doing their thing. Normally, they are adult. Normally. Another sort of question there is like, do they clean these factories knowing that people are going to come around and tour them? But I, having almost no experience working in a factory, assume that there's a weekly sort of thing where like you just clean. Or, you know, when I worked in a supermarket and stuff like that, it's just kind of, it gets cleaned as part of the weekly sort of rota of stuff to do, right? So I would presume that those videos touring these factories are fairly representative of what a normal day might look like. And also, I went back and I watched some sort of like Fender in the 50s videos. It's like not dissimilar. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of people... Especially, I think this is the real key for it, where it's like a bolt-on design. Like, these are guitars that were specifically designed to be able to be built at scale. Now, I don't think even Leo Fender sort of imagined the kind of scale that they would get to. But I think there is also a danger that at this point, like the cost of building a bolt-on guitar like this in America is far, far more expensive, presumably, based on the prices that we get back, because I don't think there is a quality gulf anymore between like a PRS SE and certainly a PRS S2. Like, there isn't huge differences that you would have expected over the years, and I think there still are in some of their guitars. Like the PRS SE Satin is like obviously a budget guitar, but this is just, and is honestly not, when you play it and when you look at it, a budget guitar versus the US model. So yeah, when you watch some of these videos, you consistently see similar things. You also get a little bit of an insight. So 2 like interesting things that I learned. So Gibson, for example, there was a Mark Agnesi video where he was touring the Gibson factory. He said that binding is actually the most sort of time-consuming, most training needed job that they do in the Gibson factory. And, you know, particularly if you think like an ES335, you've got to bind 2 sides. That is apparently one of the most tricky jobs to do. Now, obviously, Fender don't bind most of their guitars, so that's not necessarily as much of an issue for them. And then I remember Fender in the custom shop, like the assembly of the parts. So assuming that you've got your paint, all of your bits and pieces already done, which are done at different stations, right? That's the way these factories work. It's like 2 hours of assembly and setup per guitar, which is actually far less than I would have thought, maybe. And if you gave me all of these parts together, could I assemble it, like drill it, screw it together and assemble it and get it like roughly set up in 2 hours? I don't know. To me, it seems quite quick. And that was one of the other things, like, the factory-made guitars, like, really busy factories, I do also feel like this is an area where you actually get some element of, like, specialization. For instance, like, versus a guy who's just building a guitar in a garage, how many nuts is he making throughout the year if you don't count the ones... I'm not going to make a joke about masturbation here, am I? But how many actual nuts is this guy going to be making? And you think even like a boutique builder, if you were building, I don't know, 30, 40 guitars a year, which would put you at a fairly, like, you're a pretty busy builder at that point if it's just you, right? You're going to be building 30 or 40 nuts. If you were in one of these places and actually, like, hand filing a nut as part of your job, then you would probably be building more nuts or working on more nuts, stop saying nuts, in a week than a boutique builder would be working on in a full year. So there's no reason to expect, I don't think, that certain elements of this guitar manufacturing process couldn't be done better by someone overseas whose entire job is focused on that area for a bit of time. That's another area for me that I've noticed, like, even boutique builders, like in the UK or wherever, the Fender Custom Shop, all of these things, boutique doesn't mean that they don't use CNC machines and stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? It just is kind of like a representation of scale. But even at a smaller scale, I think a lot of builders, like even Nacho, even I think K-Line, even, you know, a guy very local to me, Seth Backus, like if you check through what he talks about, CNC is part of it. And I think just in 2025, most guitars, there's one exception electric guitar wise that I think I know of, is Fibonacci guitars. So my buddy David Beebe, I played a couple of his. They're amazing guitars. And also, this is maybe the point that I might end up coming to. So those are guitars that are made in Hungary, and Hungary, I'm starving. There's no CNC on those. So those are really like works of art in a lot of respects, and hand carved, all of those things. But like a CNC is now just part of the process of building guitars for most things, I think. Does Sorhands have a point here? I think he does, which is that actually if you're building a bolt-on guitar, buying bolt-on guitars and this kind of stuff, that actually probably when you look at like the factory in PRS in Maryland versus the Cortek factory, PRS part of that, probably a lot of those processes are going to look quite similar, and that's kind of probably like the reality of this now. And certainly I've had some, you know, very cheap Squier guitars, like a Squier Telly. I've had some very expensive Fender guitars, like a Fender Custom Shop. The difference isn't as vast as you might expect based on the price. It's kind of all I would conclude, really. And like I say, if you want to call these things trash, beyond kind of just calling a video that because it's funny, I would say try building one of these things. Like it has totally humbled me in terms of like even just finishing a guitar. Like your first 2-3 guitars that you finish, I've only built a few parts casts. It's like, it is time consuming stuff. I don't think I could build a guitar anywhere near the quality of this in terms of things like fit and finish, like actual stuff. Like if you imagine what it takes to get a guitar like that, you know, even factory made stuff that's being churned out, you know, millions of years, like the quality on these things is not to be dismissed, in my opinion. So that's kind of like just a bit of a video on that. I think it is easy to assume that these things are all kind of churned out, especially when some of them are really cheap. I think I have quite a lot of respect for the guys that are building these and women, because what you do get a sense of when you hold them in your hands and compare them to the expensive US counterparts is that, to be honest, the quality really is there, particularly with PRS, but you know, like with Sire as well. When I hold that Sire up next to a Sir guitar, these are things that I think people are you know, quick to kind of dismiss, but actually the quality is not as much of a gulf as you'd think. And if you want a guitar that is entirely made boutique and all of that sort of stuff, I think you will pay quite a lot of money for them. But, you know, will it make you sound any different? To be honest, like, and this is a thing that's, I think, true of nylon guitars. Unless you're right next to one, like my buddy Francisco's kind of told me a story about, he was in South America, and I think it was anyway, but he had his like classical guitar that he'd been playing, and there was another guy that had a guitar, and he was sort of playing, I think, outside a cafe, and Francisco and him got chatting, and they said, well, maybe we should play together, and Francisco played his guitar next to him, and he was like, I can't hear it. Like, what's happened? And such was the level of the projection of this guy's guitar that Francisco couldn't hear his own guitar over this guitar. And, in the electric guitar world, I don't think that's the kind of thing that we're really even aware of or thinking about. But in the classical guitar world, of course, if they're playing unplugged a lot of the time, like the projection of the instrument, the vibration of the top and all of that sort of stuff is really important. And our trash guitars are much more similar to one another than that when it really comes down to it. And luckily we got electric on our side to sort of make us sound how we want anyway. And yeah, I personally thought for quite a lot of years that the actual guitar itself in terms of tone is not the most important factor. It's just part of the soup. The amp that you're plugging into or the modeler or whatever, I think is just as important, if not more, than the guitar. The guitar, though, needs to feel good and needs to be set up pretty well. And all of those things, can be found in the mass-manufactured stuff. And just as likely that it'll be fairly decent these days coming out of Cortek as it will coming out of Corona or Mexico, in my opinion. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And have you found any of these guitars that you think punch way above their weight? Or are we just overpaying for the higher end stuff at the end of the day? It could be that, right?